Can you testing 1 2 3? Can you hear me?
Only mine. There we go. So everyone should be able to hear me as well as Aaron now. They could just hear him before. But anyway, as I said, happy Friday. Official intro in just a second. This is why this isn't the real start of things, because we have to make sure the audio is actually working first. But yeah, good stuff. We're just sort of talking about Roger Ver and his case and, all that stuff. First Light commented on Odysee. Yes, can hear you both. Thanks for the audio check, Thomas. It's good to have you watching. And if you are on Inleo, which is a blockchain social media platform that runs on the Hive blockchain, I have a threadcast going there. And if you want to leave comments there, I'll upvote you to get you some money from that, some corns, as it were. But yeah, so what a week, what a day, what an interesting way that this world has unfolded over the last couple of last few weeks. This has been an eventful January. Let's just say that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it has been. I actually just finished this article that will be coming out soon. It's another one of these 5,000 word things, but it's called "The Unfinished War on Crypto." And in the beginning, I actually reflect on this, which is I haven't been able to celebrate yet. Which you would think that I've been fighting CBDCs exclusively for like 2 years, and so my entire goal has been to stop CBDCs and stop basically Joe Biden's executive order 14067, which is what has been used to terrorize everybody in crypto. And so he's rescinded that. He said that there's no CBDC. Ross is free. Yet the feeling that I have not yet had this like overwhelming feeling of joy or euphoria. It went from numbness first to then kind of like fatigue, and then I actually sat down and thought about it a lot, and then wrote this article. Because CBDCs are not done with by any stretch of the imagination. But part of it is I'm so used to, as a political activist, I've been fighting Obamacare and things for like 2 decades, and we've never won, and by the way, even with the Republican Party has promised to do the right thing several times, and they always failed. And so part of it, I think, is probably some combination of PTSD and shock that Trump actually followed through with some of this stuff. So I think it's still trying to settle in, but there are still dozens and dozens of individuals and companies that were targeted under Executive Order 14067. And for them, the lawfare still persists every day. They're still fighting their court battles. They're still, fighting. In some cases, they're in prison or fighting, going to prison. And so, it's weird that the horrors persist. So on the one hand, it's great. Trump can do meme coins, but yet there are people that are facing jail time for doing, ICOs. So it's kind of a weird, it's a disconnect that, by the way, I think can be resolved. I think that actually maybe the answer to this. So I'm not actually pessimistic. I think part of putting this article together is I think Trump needs to be made aware of, because he probably isn't, how profound the lawfare is. And I actually outlined this in the article. When you look at the 127 companies targeted by the SEC, 47 companies in DeFi targeted by the CFTC, the FDIC going after people for debanking, and then also destroying banks, which is what they did with Silvergate and Signature Bank in order to remove competition for FedNow, for the Federal Reserve. To the IRS attacks on Roger Ver and others. Like, it's massive how the scope and scale of this. And this also includes the debanking and Operation Choke Point 2.0. So when you actually lay all that out, which I did in this article, it's like, wow, this is, it's massive. This actually affects thousands and thousands of people. And, one of the things that I liked about is what he did with the J6 prisoners, where originally he said, well, we're going to look at these cases on a one-off basis and then make a decision. And at the end, I think Trump's own words, he said, fuck it. And they just pardoned all 1,500. And I believe that same attitude should be applied to all of the lawfare under 14067, because when you dissect this executive order, and just to recap for everybody, if you're not familiar, Biden signed Executive Order 14067 on March the 9th, 2022. And what this executive order does is two things. One, it authorized the U.S. government to pursue a CBDC, and then it also authorized a whole of government approach to regulating digital assets. And the thing that you have to understand about this is the reason it's in the same executive order is the reason that they needed to regulate the digital assets is so that there was no competition for CBDCs. So this wasn't about solving any problems where there's rampant fraud and people were being harmed. That had nothing to do with the intent of the executive order. So these companies that were targeted, a lot of them, there's this real interesting intersection of liberty and crypto, individuals and companies, where they weren't even breaking the law or where the law was really murky. But they, and of all of the 20,000 or so coins and projects that were out there, there were some that were blatantly according to their own rules that I disagree with, but blatantly in violation. But they would go after, utility tokens that were projects that were pro-liberty and that were effective over actual investment tokens. The whole thing was all about lawfare. So in essence, people were treated as guilty first. There was no presumption of innocence. They just went after everyone because they needed to shut down the competition for CBDC. Yeah. So I think he should just dismiss these cases. They can always refile the cases, but I think that they should start by dismissing the cases now, because people shouldn't have to live under this lawfare. And Trump understands what it's like to live under lawfare. And I've been interviewing more and more people about this. I had Joe Rotes from Dragon Chain on my last podcast, and it's the same story over and over again. Somebody that was trying to promote liberty, somebody that actually consulted a lawyer before they did whatever they did, and then they were targeted years and years ago, and then the government didn't really ratchet up and move to trial or move to indictment until after this executive order was signed by Biden. So I want to get all this information out there so that Trump understands it, because I don't think people do understand what exactly happened here, or the degree to which, even in Roger's case, this stuff goes back to 2014 and they didn't convene a grand jury until 2024. I mean, make that make sense. A decade. That doesn't even make sense.
What if he was an old person and just wasn't even around to stand trial or anything at that point? 10 years is a long time. Let me hit the intro real quick, and then we'll just dive right in, because we kind of started on that first point, which is the order. And then, we'll just go right there. All right, everyone, 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so officially now, everyone, hey, welcome. This is the Digital Cash Rundown, episode 182, I believe, with Aaron Day. How's it going? How have you been?
I'm doing well. I've been traveling. I'm in Mexico now. I was just in Miami. But, talk about a world-changing couple of weeks.
Yeah, for sure.
Chaotic.
We got into a little bit of that in the pre-show chatter, but we'll get a little quick recap on especially the executive order stuff in just a second. I got to go shill Coin ATM Radar, because they're nice enough to sponsor the podcast real quick. So this podcast is very happily sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some random person in some random place. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, which happens all the time, even today, especially today, you truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you can find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy or sell cryptos for cash. And on their website, you can search by coin address if the ATM supports selling as well as buying for the people like me that don't have fiat, right? And you could also search by a geographical area such as country, state, and city. And you can compare and check actual current fees at the different ATMs. So if any of that sounds cool to you, go to coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com. So now we're just talking about this executive order, right? And so I'm just throwing up on the screen one of your posts on X here about EO 14067 was about debanking, destroying crypto liberty projects, etc. And says the reason for this was to kill the competition to roll out a CBDC. So would you mind really quick recapping and I know that we kind of touched on this pretty heavily already, but just what does the order actually do? What does this executive order that former President Biden signed, what does it actually do and talk about?
Well, it talks about authorizing exploring a CBDC, which is part one, and then related to that, and the reason that it's in the executive order is it authorizes a whole of government approach to regulating digital assets. And again, the reason for pursuing that was to shut off the competition. Because once people learn what CBDCs truly are, no one's going to want it. And so they need to shut off kind of viable alternatives to this. And so literally it was a whole of government approach. It basically authorized, the Treasury, the Department of Defense, everybody to get together and come up with proposals for how to deal with and how to regulate digital assets. And so it was all departments of the federal government. So this is why you started to see a ratchet. So some of it was working on designing and coming up with a framework for new legislation for moving forward. But most of it was enforcement of either existing laws or aggressively as possible as interpreting existing laws. So what they did was there were a lot of cases that were essentially dormant that they just ramped up considerably the prosecution of. And so that was a big part of it. And so, it's in my article, I outline, the SEC, the DOJ, the IRS, the FDIC, Treasury, and the CFTC. But I mean, that's not all. I mean, the Department of Defense is involved. You have things involving money laundering and terrorism and OFAC and a whole variety of other things. But these are the six big federal departments that ratcheted up in a huge way their enforcement. And as you can see, it was relentless in all of these cases, in the Ripple case, in the XRP case, even in cases where, even if there was a good judgment, there's prosecutorial discretion. At any point in time, the SEC could say, well, they pick what cases they want to go after. And when you look at the cases that they went after, there is a curious intersection of projects that promote libertarian principles with crypto. I mean, that is even predating this executive order, going after Library and Jeremy Kauffman was clearly politically motivated, because that's not even the easiest case you could go after. I mean, essentially what they were trying to do there was make the case that utility tokens are investment tokens, which means that they could go after pretty much everything. So this was an attempt to shut down crypto basically and neuter it completely. Because if you think about it, during this time period, almost every major crypto exchange, either left the United States or went under. And then also during that time period, then all of a sudden you see more enforcement of KYC, AML laws. Then all of a sudden it's more difficult for banks for you to onboard or offboard crypto. Everybody experienced this, and now everybody's talking about Operation Choke Point 2.0. This was all part of it. They wanted to make it difficult, if not impossible, to buy crypto, difficult to access exchanges, difficult for exchanges to operate and list coins. And they wanted to basically halt innovation and do everything that they could, because once again, the other part of this executive order was aggressively pursuing a CBDC. And so I don't think I've ever seen an example of where it's been this heavy-handed in that short of a period of time. And as I mentioned it before, 127 enforcement actions for the SEC. 63% of all crypto enforcement happened within the SEC happened after that executive order was signed.
And what was the exact date that the executive order was signed? Do you know, or just
it was signed on March the 9th, 2022.
Yeah, so I definitely noticed that. So you mentioned a couple of very interesting points there. First of all, it's those Venn diagrams of liberty and crypto, which I think are very telling on a couple levels. First of all, the liberty movement has been around for generations. One could say hundreds of years, since the dawn of time, whatever you want to call it. But the actual heavy friction with the government has only happened, from my experience, from my very rudimentary understanding, I guess, around very certain things. So, like, for example, the Ruby Ridge type thing, where you have people who are organized with guns, which there's nothing illegal against. There's nothing in the US. There's nothing illegal about organizing. There's nothing illegal about holding guns. And there's technically nothing illegal about both of them, really. But when you have that, you could tell that's a threat, because then you have like an attack on that. And then, of course, like 3D printing or manufacturing firearms as well. That's another thing people don't like. But it's always these very niche fringe use cases. And then, as far as I understand, the non-crypto liberty movement hasn't really run into a lot of problems in the last couple of decades. And it's been because crypto is the powerful tool. That's the really powerful tool that they have. And on the other side, crypto as a whole, I'm not going to want to talk too much smack, but like, let's be honest, who's going to be really freed by like Ripple or something, right? Especially because Ripple's an interesting case because the SEC did go after them, but at the same time, they're trying to build CBDCs on the XRP ledger and stuff like that. But yeah, so just the Venn diagram of both of those. And then you can kind of tell the result of laws based on, you can kind of tell what laws do and what enforcement does based on the ecosystem after effects. Because first of all, notice people who've gone to prison over this stuff. Roger, is not in prison yet. Let's hope, fingers crossed. But you have people like, Ian Freeman. You have people like Mark Hopkins. You have people like the Tornado Cash people like the Samurai Wallet people. Almost all of these of the actual like prison cases are privacy-related tools, or, which is a similar kind of a thing, buying for cash. Now, privacy-related tools are still very usable and prevalent in the US, even though some of the big ones for Bitcoin and Ethereum, again, the top two chains, not really a coincidence, did get sort of taken down there. But I've noticed the P2P markets, which used to be the lifeblood of crypto, it's gone. It's just dried up everywhere except for places like Africa and the developing world. And so that's the result of this action. There is no big hand-down law that says you cannot trade for cash, or there was nothing banned like explicitly to that degree, but something happened and it killed that entire cash for crypto market. It's just all the sites that I used to use, or actually I only used like one or two back in the day, but all the ones I was aware of, just they're gone.
Well, yeah, I think they like to use money transmitter laws. They do have some things in their bag of tricks that they like to pull off. And then what's even more disturbing about it, I think one of the most disturbing things about Ian's case is literally, if they want to shut something down, they don't wait for a crime to be committed. They will literally put in plants and they will try to entrap you, which is one of the things they did with Ian. And Ian didn't even fall for it, and they still try to push it. So that's how that it's explicitly about going after the liberty aspect of this, because they were going after people that weren't even committing crimes. They were trying to manufacture crimes, and in some cases unsuccessfully. But one of the things that I found about this that was interesting is I interviewed this guy, Stephen Nerioff, who was one of the, I guess, technically a founder. They dispute the title of Ethereum, but he's a lawyer. He actually came up with the legal structure for the ICO, the legal structure for the security token offering. And, he decided to step away from Ethereum. They basically weren't following his advice on fundraising. He saw some shenanigans with China, the SEC, and everything else. And then the DOJ stepped in and tried to extort him. They manufactured a case against Nerioff, claiming that Nerioff was involved in extortion. 12 FBI agents came to his house in the middle of the night, arrested him, threw him in a van, and showed him a list of people and said, unless you get us information that leads to convictions on multiple of these people, you'll never see your kids again. This is 2019. And the people on that list include Roger Ver, Patrick Byrne, Bruce Fenton, Naomi Brockwell. So in 2019, you had the Department of Justice and the FBI making up cases to get people to cough up information on other people in this crypto liberty, Venn diagram. So again, obviously this is no crimes were committed. They're going out of their way to even, extort people to make up information. That's how much of a threat they perceived what you could do if you actually applied cryptocurrency properly and started using it as peer-to-peer cash.
Yeah.
They knew that was something they needed to stop.
I'm sure things like this happen in other countries. The way this is going down does seem to have a uniquely American flair to it, in that the supposed protections by the Constitution, etc., are strong. So it's hard to just go after people like this, or in theory. And so I found out that I've noticed that a lot of the U.S. government's enforcement, so to speak, is basically things that are cracking down on things that are perfectly legal through loopholes and things like that. And not even, well, it's technically illegal, but finding a way to just end this activity. And so peer-to-peer trading of cryptocurrencies is either legal, or the illegality of it is in the need for a money services business license or some kind of thing like that on a federal level is not widely known at all. And if it was widely known, it would be exempted by legislative action very quickly, probably. And so because of that, rather than it's legal, so they have to find ways of arresting enough people to create a chilling effect to make it de facto illegal before people realize it's illegal, and then make it legal. And so it's this weird situation that makes this so hard to like pinpoint and fight against, is because most crypto users have been able to do anything they wanted kind of over the last 16 years in the US. And the laws have said basically, up until the capital gains kind of got more figured out in a direct way, have been basically said, yeah, do whatever you want, or, oh, do whatever you want, but anytime you sell or spend, you got to pay capital gains. And that's kind of been it. And then 2022 hit, and then it all went kaboom.
Yep. And it did. And the important thing for people to know is that it did because specifically to ruin it, to usher in CBDCs. So this is why the fact that this is all in the same executive order has to be understood. The CBDC threat is real, and it's still real. I mean, it's not just because Trump rescinded Biden's thing and then actually also put out his own executive order saying no CBDC, doesn't mean work on CBDCs has stopped. The Federal Reserve has been working on CBDCs in the United States since 2019. Do I believe that Project Hamilton and Project Cedar and Regulated Liability Network development has stopped because of this executive order? No, I do not believe that it's stopped. Do I believe that stable coins, which Trump is favoring and is now kind of the new thing that's starting to become popular amongst the politically connected people in crypto? I mean, a bank-issued stablecoin is indistinguishable from a CBDC, from a programmability and tracking perspective.
Yeah, in a practical perspective, as far as what you could do for the end user, yeah.
Exactly. And then you have Tether, which, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. I truly think Tether is going to become one of the largest financial scandals ever at some point in time. I know people disagree on that, but I actually, before I worked on this article, I was actually going to, focus on that. So I've been doing a lot of research on this, and it's mind boggling how Tether operates. But it's one of those things where it's so big, it'll probably get bailed out. But that doesn't mean that it's not a major financial, issue. Yeah. It's a major financial issue, but it's now so big, it might get either bailed out or even merged. I mean, I could see it becoming a backdoor CBDC itself at this point, and I'm going to try to lay that out. It's a lot. It's complicated for folks, so I'm trying to actually figure out how to simplify how to explain all of it. But the CBDC threat is still there, and 133 countries are still pursuing CBDCs. So it's not as though explicitly,
not an implicit one like say Tether or other stable coins.
No, correct. I mean, explicitly. So you can look at the CBDC tracker. And I think Europe, in response to Trump coming out and saying no CBDCs here, they're actually accelerating their CBDC. So the big fear that I have is they're kind of twofold right now. One, while Trump might have rescinded Executive Order 14067, he did not rescind or stop the lawfare that has happened because of that executive order. So that's one thing that I think is critically important.
So what changed with the rescinding of the order then? So like, what was the government able to do that they're no longer technically able to do, or what was illegal or a problem that now is not?
Well, I suspect you won't see these enforcement actions, new enforcement actions. You won't see, the SEC going after everything relentlessly. And by the way, once Trump and Melania launched these meme tokens, I mean, I think that actually you could argue that a lot of the rules they were trying to enforce, or way they were trying to backdoor or broadly interpret laws, a lot of that's going to go away. And I think the same is true with the CFTC. It will be interesting to see what happens with privacy coins and some of these like Tornado Cash, but what you're not going to see new enforcement actions. So I think you're basically going to see a significant lull in enforcement actions so the attitude is going to be
until something new happens.
Until something new happens, and they're working on, I hate to say pro-crypto legislation, because any legislation is not really pro-crypto, but they are working on crypto legislation. So until such time as Congress passes new laws and provides new, quote, clarity, they're not going to be aggressively pursuing the enforcement actions. But that doesn't change the fact that these other enforcement actions are still ongoing. And so I think that, and again, as I say this, I'm not pessimistic about it. I just don't think Trump is aware, which is part of why I wrote this article, is I think that it's kind of like with the J6ers. Oh, well, there are 1,500 J6ers. You're going to find out there are probably more than 1,500 people that are actively the victims of lawfare under 14067.
That's the thing, but I will say on the whole Roger thing before we, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think that like Ross Ulbricht, was arguably, as far as all these cases, and I'm very happy he's free, Russ was one of the most, I would say, vulnerable to legitimate, from the point of view of the government at least, legitimate enforcement action against, in that it's like, you're selling drugs, they're illegal federally, there you go. It's pretty clear, whereas the rest of the stuff is very much more murky. And he's the big one that got pardoned, which is a fantastic sign for the community about what you can do moving forward, I guess, and expect to be treated much better. The difference is Trump did not really understand the case, or why this one like nerd dude is in prison or whatever, this drug kingpin or nerd or whatever the hell he is to Trump, did not understand that for the first 4 years. And honestly, I think he probably had other things to worry about. But now, I think the reason he pardoned Ross, the reason he was willing to pardon Ross, had to do with the whole lawfare thing that he experienced firsthand, I think. But the reason it got on his radar, as in came back on his radar as like, this is something you should do, probably had a lot to do with the crypto vote about like this, they care about this guy, so do this. Roger's not the same quite. I think if Roger gets on his radar from that thing, first of all, he seems like he doesn't care as much because of the non-citizen element. But I'm more or less pessimistic about a Roger specific, I guess, pardon or charges dropped or something like that. It's more of like, if it gets on the radar, it will be like a wave of things. It's just kind of like what you were talking about if he's aware of all these pending enforcement actions, even if new ones don't happen. Let's like backdate the executive order rescinding. Let's not just do it from here on out. Let's just clean up the damage from it.
Yeah, I that may be right. I mean, I'm not as, even though Elon came out and said no pardon and that membership has its privileges, I don't view that, by the way, as being final. I mean,
he says a lot of things.
Elon is not elected. He's not the president of the United States. And so, and we don't know if he talked to Trump about it. Elon may very well have gone to other people related to Trump and said, hey, what do you think about this? And they came back with this. But until I hear Trump actually say, no, this isn't going to happen for this reason, I consider Elon's statement to be a temporary setback that hopefully we can use to our advantage to bring awareness to the topic. That's actually how I view it. But I think that you're right. I mean, I think it's easier to so Angela McArdle cut a deal with Trump. Trump needed votes, and Ross was on the top of the list of one of the things that would help, get libertarians to vote for Trump. And Trump likes deals, right? I mean, we've all struggled to find what like Trump's core principles or ideology is, but we know he's clearly open to doing deals, and he actually followed through on his deal. And yeah, Roger, I kind of wish we'd started to talk about this earlier and maybe have Roger involved in the package with Ross. If we could turn back time, that would have been a useful thing to have done. But at the same time, I do think that there's getting kind of like the J6ers. We got to come up with a clever name, not the 14067ers. We got to come up with we got to label that. We've got to label that, and we've got to make a movement.
The CBDC
if anybody's
victims.
got any ideas, the CBDC victims, the CBDC Biden tyranny victims, whatever it is, let's come up with that. Let's market it, and then let's put everybody together and let's start amplifying their stories. I'm starting with this article, but I want to really see if we can get a movement around it, because it's really bad, right? I mean, it is all of everything from the debanking to all of it. And clearly, if Joe Roach started Dragon Chain today, nobody would be taking enforcement action on what he's doing. And what is happening to Roger, I think it is ridiculous, and it's a gigantic, it's overreach, and it does have lawfare all over it anyway, but it is related to 14067, because if you are the Biden administration and you're in March of 2022 and you're saying, hey, listen, how do we, with maximum effect, use the federal government to shut down the people that will be the most effective at coming up with alternatives to CBDCs, you're going to come up with somebody like Roger being near or at the top of the list, based on not just the Bitcoin Jesus stuff. I mean, as funny as it is, and even though I don't associate him with this, Roger was the kind of, in a way, the co-founder and the first investor in XRP. And then all of the other stuff that he's done in Bitcoin. So, I mean, Roger's always been about peer-to-peer digital cash. And so he is invested in and supports a whole variety of projects. So if you can shut him up, then that takes one of the most effective players out. So to me, the timing of the enforcement and the grand jury and everything, which I think they lied to the grand jury. I mean, if you look at the evidence in this case, if you go to freerogernow.org, there's a motion to dismiss, and what his team put out there are the actual communications between Roger and his lawyers and accountants. And what it shows very clearly is Roger looking to comply with the tax laws. And it was very clear from the exchange that there was uncertainty about what those tax laws even were, but Roger advocated for taking the most conservative approach because he knew he would be a target based on his previous interaction with the federal government. So I think that information and that discovery was not provided to the grand jury. So when they decided to indict, the grand jury did this based on limited information, and in fact, based on deliberately omitted information. Because if you're going to try to claim it's tax fraud, but you're going to leave out communications showing that the guy is making a best efforts working through professionals to figure out how to pay his taxes, that's a pretty big omission. And that's how bad, that's Executive Order 14067. That's a federal government that is using prosecutorial discretion to say, let's put the screws to this guy, and basically we'll throw shit up against the wall and we'll see what sticks. But no matter what, the process is the punishment. So now this guy is going to be going through legal hell, and he's going to be, in Spain, in a foreign country, and we're basically going to neuter him during this time where we're going to be trying to aggressively push out CBDCs. This is why when I originally in May started talking about this, I knew this wasn't a tax case. This was absolutely a CBDC case. And so I hope we can bundle as much of this, and particularly at this intersection of liberty and crypto, and just lay it out and try not only publicly to get the word out, but through back channels and through some other sources. I have some people that I'm going to try to talk to try to make this elevator pitch to say to Trump, these are the J6ers of crypto here. Please help these guys, because you can't have a golden age of crypto if the giants on whose shoulders all of this is happening are still dealing with Biden lawfare. Like, it's just it's a bad vibe, to say the least.
And one thing I think is refreshing. One of the most first of all, I have to just get the maxis here. So Dan Held is one of those useful idiots, I would say, who said it, just don't buy the narrative that Roger was being targeted because of lawfare. He's not. And there's just so many of these that are almost trying to get him put away. But one positive side of things, I've been very happy to see Jesse Powell, who the Kraken founder, who has been kind of grouped with Bitcoin maximalists a little bit, although obviously his business deals with lots of different coins, be very consistent in coming out in support of him. And I know that Jesse does have Trump's ear because he gave a personal $1 million to his campaign. And same thing with the Winklevoss twins. They're a little bit harder to get a read on. I mean, I think they just believe in crypto and the tech and the industry and want the industry to do well. But I don't know if they're quite as focused on the whole freedom thing like Jesse Powell is. But the point is, a lot of these higher profile kind of people, I think everyone in their right mind should recognize that, they kind of owe a debt to Roger as far as he started everything. Their business models would not exist if he hadn't gone first, if he hadn't proved it first. And I think that that's probably the money talks, right? Like who does Trump owe favors to? And in politics is a lot about that, right? Now, legacy politics, I should say. There are so many interests and interest groups and everything just pulling at these mainstream candidates that their actual ability to their actual agency to do anything is like almost nothing. They're almost on a pre-planned course, not because someone down below is telling them all the agenda. It's just that there's 1,000 agendas that are all pulling them equally, and then they kind of directs where they are. Whereas Trump sort of made his new coalition out of like nothing. He just, I'll get votes from you. And this is the people who threw a bunch of money at him, personal money, for his campaign. I'm sure he still owes them something, or at least an audience. And so I hope that Jesse can get that going.
Well, and there are other people working on this. I mean, there's stuff there's what's going on publicly, and there's stuff certainly going on behind the scenes. But I will say that this is one of the problems, though. It's kind of, all you have to do is look at the pictures, right? I mean, I see a picture of Michael Saylor with Eric Trump, and then you see some of these other things. And I've looked at this too, and I've analyzed like who are the big Bitcoin people surrounding Trump. The Winklevi twins and Roger, from what I've been able to research, have had kind of an adversarial relationship for a while. And I think the Winklevoss twins were involved in actually. I remember talking to Charlie Shrem when he got out of prison, and I remember he was, let's just say, beyond pissed at the Winklevoss twins because I think he implied they had something to do with him going to prison. And there was this whole thing where the Winklevoss twins actually complied with Ben Lawsky to get a bit license and everything else. And so they have not been ideologically pro-liberty at all. So I comment about this on their stuff all the time. Like the other day, they're like, Gemini is not going to support any interns or anybody out of MIT because Gary Gensler is going back to MIT. And I'm like, well, hey, where were you when Joy Ito was hijacking Bitcoin and pushing digital gold instead of digital cash while funding all 3 U.S. CBDC pilots? Were you boycotting MIT then? So I don't know. Hopefully they'll turn it around, but who knows?
Yeah, I guess it depends on their interest. The thing is, like, obviously there's people who are human freedom maximalists like us. Like Jesse Powell has definitely been one of those. There's a Roger's obviously like the gold standard of that, so to speak. Brian Armstrong, I would say, was sort of, and maybe he's turned more into the Winklevoss style of thing. But they're more interested. They're more what I would call like Zuckerberg adjacent, in that they're interested. They like the tech that they're building and investing on. They really want that to succeed, and they want their personal businesses to succeed. And whatever's good for all that, they're kind of on board with. But as far as these greater principles of liberty and stuff like that, they're not opposed. They're just not. It's not in their focus thing. And so because. Do you remember off the top of your head if Gemini was sued by the SEC?
I can't remember if they were sued by them. I believe they were. Yeah, let me double check. But yes, I believe they were, because at one point, Yes. Gemini, along with Genesis Global Capital, for offering
Yes.
unregistered securities
Yeah, and
through the Gemini Earn
that
program.
was the staking thing. And I've talked to a lot of people in a lot of these exchanges about their priorities and stuff, for work. And it seems like Gemini was always trying to be very careful, like as far as regulations and stuff, because whereas like Coinbase was also kind of careful, but kind of not. And then Binance is what you call the opposite of careful, just everything. It seems like despite their best efforts to walk that fine line, being all in with the New York City financiers and all that kind of stuff, despite all their best efforts, they stayed very clean up until the Earn program, where whether it's FTX, whether it's DeFi, there was a bunch of staking competition, and you had to offer some sort of a staking product, or you would just lose market share. And so they did that. And then that was what they got. And it's like, okay, look, it's personal now. Like we were going to just forget the whole thing. But now that like even we got affected by the whole SEC drama, now we want to make sure to like punish that. So it's like, okay, well, this is too far for us. Everything else, like the whole lawfare against, P2P trading, the whole other stuff, that was maybe not good, but that was acceptable because it didn't affect us. But if we, the most connected crypto people in the world, the most financially connected people in New York City, could not stay clean, according to the SEC, if we could not stay, that it was almost like friendly fire in that case. And they're just like, yeah, this guy's too much. We got to get rid of him.
Well, you bring up a good point, and I actually might add them to my article because I just looked this up. The lawsuit against Gemini was filed by the SEC on January the 12th, 2023. So once again, this is something under Executive Order 14067. I mean, they're
after.
Target. They're a target there as well. And one of the other things is I saw, and then there's some debate back and forth, but that Michael Saylor might have to pay unearned income taxes on his Bitcoin through MicroStrategy. There was a Wall Street Journal article about this, and then people were debating whether it was true, but basically they were saying that Saylor might owe billions. And again, this is going to be on regulations that were changed related to and after this Executive Order 14067. So truly, Saylor, everybody should be aligned on this. Everybody is facing the same lawfare, and no one should be rooting. If Roger loses, then everybody loses. Like there's no upside. Even if you don't like Roger and you're a Bitcoin maxi, it is not in your best interest personally for Roger to lose this case, because it means a whole bunch of different things about the IRS being able to retroactively go back and apply vague tax policy.
Yeah.
It means that your attorney-client privilege can be hijacked and in fact no longer exists. It means you can't rely on your accountants and lawyers for professional advice, because that doesn't matter either. Even if you follow guidelines and everything else, now we'll still throw you in prison on things related to crypto, because all of these what Saylor's doing is pretty unprecedented as well, in terms of, okay, well, he's creating all these financial instruments and then he's borrowing money from the public and doing all of this other stuff. And so everybody should be on board with Roger winning this case. And it doesn't matter whether you disagree with him on anything else.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see, because one thing's for sure, like I think that money is the most honest language, of course, because no one lies by buying stuff they don't value. It just doesn't happen. And so because of that, you can learn a lot about people, and people's reaction to this Roger case are very interested and segmented, where you have the people at the very bottom, like the plebs, as they actually call themselves, the plebs. Most of them tend to be anti-Roger just because that's what they heard. Oh, he's the B-cash, or he sucks. Some aren't, because they're like, well, I think freedom should be, I don't like him, but I don't think he should be in prison. The middle management tier hates him because they understand at a greater level that Bitcoin can't compete with freedom money, like modern Bitcoin, I should say. And that if Roger's message gets out there, then that destroys that screws up their thing. And so they want him put away forever. At the higher tier, again, which I put like a Jesse Powell maybe at, and you put, the Gemini twins, and people on the Sailor level tier, which Sailor's an interesting exception though. On that tier, they start to become a little bit more sympathetic towards him again because they see the big picture. As you pointed out, it could come for any of them. Now, I think the reason why Sailor is not beating the Free Roger drum is because he doesn't view, because he knows he's up to no good. Like the people like Jesse Powell, like they don't want to go to prison either, and they want to stop that so they're safe. The thing is, if Roger is released and all the executive order stuff, the backdating happens, everyone else gets their cases dropped, that doesn't solve Sailor because he's still doing some sketchy financial things that could lose a lot of people a lot of money. So it's like, yeah, sure, Roger would make things easier, but not for him because he's not just interested in avoiding lawfare. Even if you end all the lawfare, he's still vulnerable where no one else is. So that's probably why you'd see him just be quiet on the issue, because he doesn't want any extra kind of attention to that. And it could also be that one of the reasons why he's so vigorously pumping all the time might have to do, as you mentioned, those sort of tax obligations that could come home to roost, and he just needs as much as possible to make that happen.
That is very possible. He's gotten into trouble before. I mean, he actually just settled a tax thing with the IRS related to Washington, D.C. And, and this is funny. I've had some people say, well, other people were able to settle. Well, Roger hasn't even been told how much they think he owes, right? He hasn't even been given that offer. Sailor was. But no, I think you're onto something. I think that and I think now that Sailor's on the front cover of Forbes, which is kind of a kiss of death, which is, Sam Bankman-Fried and the CEO of Theranos and everything else, like that's kind of a bad sign. We might be reaching a peak here. I look at it this way: they're in such bad situation that they need to force taxpayers to pump their bags, right? I mean, is this kind of the situation that we're in?
This is kind of funny though.
Strategic reserves.
On a side note about Forbes, I wonder how self-aware Forbes is. It's just like, I wonder if, like, how many people on at Time Magazine know that the former dictator of Germany during the 30s and 40s was on the cover. Like, they have that in the back of their mind when they put someone else on the cover. Just like, I wonder how many people, like, for example, Jim Cramer knows. He's got to know that anytime he says something, it's the opposite curse. He knows by now. What I wonder is, does Forbes know that were they like, well, is this the last we hear from Sailor? Do they have that in the back of their mind, or do they just think, well, this is the best person of the time, we'll just put him up there and then see what happens?
They may not be self-aware. I mean, it seems like the mainstream media is pretty immune to the feedback. I mean, that's why they dug themselves into such a hole. So, but yeah.
Yeah. So I really hope Roger. I hope his case goes well. Obviously, it's one of those cases where, and I have to say, I'm kind of from around that generation, but there's people who are even earlier, in that, in the actual Roger generation, not like I came around in like the 2013 era, who there's a lot of stress because they used crypto to the best of their knowledge. And now it's just like, well, you have to report this, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, I got it from a few random sketchy exchanges that only existed for a brief period of time. There's no paper trail there. They can't give me forms there. There's none of this. Like, I don't know, like, how many trades were taxable events, how many things weren't. Where do I stand now? Even the most law-abiding people, if you're in crypto early enough, so Roger's sins are, he was in crypto early enough to where just using crypto and owning it at that point means there was no way you could have done so legally because there was just no idea of how to do so. And that's a lot of people are in that boat, I'm sure. But then the other sin was just giving them the reason to go after him. And not just promoting freedom money was the reason. They're just like, yep, let's just get him. And if there's Charlie Shrem and people like that, he already did his time. So I don't think they'd go back after someone like that. But all the early people, and to your point about like the Bitcoin maximalists that should want him to be free, there's a lot. I do know some old school maxis who were actually using Bitcoin back in the digital cash era. And they are vulnerable to this today. They have a lot of money. I'm sure they paid a bunch of taxes on it eventually. But if someone wanted, they better keep a low profile.
Yep. No, I'm sure there are a lot of people that are very worried right now. And because early on, a lot of people thought Bitcoin was anonymous, right? That was kind of the early vibe on this. I mean, Ross thought that. I mean, I know even Roger, I played this clip from Liberty Forum from 2012 or 2013. And I mean, he actually talks about Bitcoin being anonymous in that talk. And so I think there were a lot of people that had that conception and are probably very nervous about not only did they pay their taxes, but did they buy something with it that, now that it's on an immutable ledger, is that an issue as well? Like the idea of buying illegal drugs with a currency that's on an immutable ledger is actually not a great idea, as it turns out. So there's a whole variety of things. Now, on the flip side to that, the statute of limitations has run out. So Roger's situation was, he filed taxes, and then, like 2016, I think, is when he filed the tax return. So for most of these early cases, the statute of limitations is up for like that very early period of time. So I think the look back period is like 7 years in some cases, 10 years in another. But I think a lot of those people are safe for some of it. But a lot of people didn't figure it out, still haven't actually figured it out. The funny thing about Roger's case is, I think Coinbase ended up sending out like 90,000 1099 forms retroactively to people saying, hey, you guys didn't pay your taxes on this. And none of those people went to jail. Roger would have been better off probably just not paying tax at all. The irony is that 90 years out of the 109 that he's looking at are they're saying sending a fraudulent tax return through the mail. So 30 years per instance for sending. And this is, by the way, to your point, how they use the rules against you. They use these things where it's like, well, hey, you sign your tax return, and when you do that, it's under penalty of perjury, right? And so they can get you for anything because look, at the end of the day, it's a 16 million word, 75,000 page tax code. How in the hell can you possibly know if you complied? If they want to get you for something, even if your intent was good, if you're dealing in a murky area where it's something that's new, the probability of you even being able to comply is almost impossible, regardless of intent.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where there's a lot of shakeups happening in the current administration regarding tax policy, especially where there's like tariffs coming, which I'm not a big fan of, obviously. There's talk of getting rid of the income tax, which I'm a very big fan of. There's talk of doing a national sales tax, which I'm not a big fan of at all. There's a lot of like up and down. But if we get the same tax rate, as in the same amount we totally pay in this country, and no changes, but we just get rid of that onerous self-reporting thing, I think that'll be a massive win for liberty. And it's still not a great position afterwards to be paying this much in taxes still. But the way it absolutely should work is you get a tax bill, period. Like they say, it's like a property tax bill. They say this is what you owe, and you can either pay it or you can dispute it in court. And if you lose, you just pay what you had to, what they told you the first time. And if you win, obviously you got to pay less. And that should be it. That's it. There should be none of this calculation stuff, none of this, hiring a million accountants, none of this. Well, what do I report? Do I report this? Do I report that? Like, I don't know. And then there you go. So if we could fix that, I mean, that's kind of the thing that they went after Roger for using. I think if we manage to fix that thing, which I know that with the IRS hiring freeze, that's the other thing. The IRS hiring freeze, and then trying to send a lot of the agents that were hired, to the border. Supposedly, there's been a mass resignations from what I've been gleaning off of X headlines, things like that. I think that's the unfortunate fact, as you mentioned, is like in this era, you could go after someone for anything, kind of. And we're still sort of in that era, even though the executive order was reduced. Just in the tax system is just so horrible that kind of like the best thing you could do is just reduce the ability to enforce, the practical ability to enforce. And yeah, I mean, as much as I don't like an external revenue service being created and all that stuff, if we can get rid of the internal one, that's a great trade.
I agree, it's a great trade, and I also agree. So I actually had been working on this book, and now I'm kind of like I'm scrapping it, or maybe not, in part just because of what's going on. So it's all been chaotic. But one of the parts of the book was I've been looking at the tax code, and the tax code is a social credit system. So if you actually look at what's in those 16 million words, I mean, it's a whole penalty and incentive structure. So it's like, okay, well, you don't pay tax if you spend it on educational, right? It's like, and even with environmental tax credits and everything else, I mean, once you actually start looking through that, and I'm actually working with AI to try to like reverse engineer what a social credit system would look like based on what the tax laws are. That's exactly what it is. I mean, they are using the tax code very heavily to drive human behavior. So if you eliminate that, if you eliminate the code and you actually eliminate the IRS, then that actually takes away the primary function of the tax code, which is controlling human behavior, because it isn't even about the money, right? I mean, all the taxes that we pay, all it goes to is servicing the debt, and the money's just made up out of thin air anyway, right? It really is just a tool for social control and social manipulation. So I agree with you. It'd be a huge win to dump the IRS and move on to not that I don't like tariffs either, but to get rid of that uncertainty and almost impossibility of complying with the tax code would be a huge win.
Yes, and that's something like I don't like government, right? I don't think any government is good. Europe, in my opinion, has a lot worse problems than the U.S. does as far as government is concerned. However, from my understanding, most European nations make tax compliance a lot easier than the U.S. The U.S. is like one of those nightmare cases, kind of like with among the free world, the supposed free world, like a lot of times like police brutality and stuff like that seems to be heavier in the U.S. For example, prison population higher than anywhere other than El Salvador as a percentage of population, and I don't know how El Salvador's how current that stuff is, but it was at one point. But I think that is one of those secret things that I think crypto is the key catalyst for major reform in the U.S. because of this. At least this is my positive outlook, right? I really hope, because the average person goes to work and then they basically just report a couple things on a page, and then they submit that every April, and that's it. They just like make money, and they just say, dependents, this, that, nope, done. And it's like, that's kind of it. Their income is just, they make money and then they spend it. And then as long as they have enough, and then their taxes are withheld for the most part, right? And so for the most part, they don't have to deal with this stuff. The salaried person, and the salaried person is just like everyone, not everyone, but it's a big chunk of the country. And then when you get beyond that, you get people who basically, there's like the small business entrepreneur types who are screwed, of course. But then you got the upper middle class, the upper class, all of them who can just afford to pay someone to just, here we go, deal with it. And then they just dump them a pile of paperwork, pay them a few grand, and there you go. You're on your way. The average American has never had to deal with the absurdity of the IRS. And now they do. Because now when you buy crypto, you're just like, oh, I'm going to buy a thing. Like, the average person doesn't invest in the same way. It's not nearly in the same, like, ooh, I'm going to go on Coinbase and buy like $40 of Shiba Inu and see what happens with this. Like, it just doesn't happen for the average person. Now they do. Right. Now you share, I'm going to sell it here. I'm going to swap to this thing. A few actions. All of a sudden, you have the big profit and loss and everything, the capital gains reporting. And now they're like, what the hell is this? And now you have what used to be most of the country, not exposed to this absurdity. Now they are exposed to this absurdity. And now the pressure from the average voter is just like, no, we don't want this anymore. We want it simple.
Yep. Yep. No, that's true. And I wonder what's going to happen to that $600 reporting. Well, again, hopefully all of this goes away. So I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
part of me, maybe I won't do a book, but maybe I'll do an article about it because maybe it would be helpful for people to start looking at the tax code as a social credit system,
Mm-hmm.
as kind of more momentum for why we should get rid of it or simplify it. Because
Yeah. Well, I would say keep on writing because I don't think it's going to get, I don't think it's going to go away or be completely simplified. I just think that's like a 0% chance in the next 10 years. So unless you take 11 years to write the book, I think you're fine. At least from like, even
yeah,
if some stuff is outdated by the time it comes out. But yeah, the social credit, I mean, I do know just every person knows there's carve outs for being legally married, for having children, for things like that, that they incentivize to a certain extent. And that's just like the very base surface thing. But then there's other things that you get kind of deeper in. And I think that like a lot of people would kind of want to know, you know, what exactly it has. I'm sure everyone pays accountants and preparers and stuff a lot of money. Unfortunately, that will be a lobby, which sucks.
yep,
There will be a
yep,
lobby. I think there's a lot of very well-meaning, hardworking people in that industry, and I salute them for helping us with this absolute mess that we live in. But now that they have this position, they just have to fight for it, right? And unfortunately, you're gonna have to, you know, they're gonna have to find new jobs or other things if this gets fixed. But I mean, hopefully, the world is so much of a better place as a result of that getting fixed that having to change careers a little bit is not going to be that bad of a thing.
yep. Well, they're either going to get taken out because the tax code gets simplified, or they're going to get taken out by AI. So, one way or another, if you're in the tax field, you probably should be thinking about another occupation.
Yes, or be in like the software field, right? And the software
Yep.
accounting field, because once you got that, and there are quite a few different tools that help for that, but once you get some sort of like automated thing, I think that even if the tax code got super simplified, the profit and loss tracking type elements for pure just do you, are you making money on this crazy basket of shitcoins you got kind of thing.
Yep.
I think that'll be very useful. So even if you don't, the information on that is, could be interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll probably be wrapping up pretty soon. I'm just trying to think. We kind of went over almost everything. I'll hit on two last little things because I posted on that. Well, one thing is just a continuation. I did write. You said you wrote like a 5,000 word article on like that on the how the crypto wars aren't over. I wrote like a 500 word one. This is like a tiny little one. And basically the bullet points were, first of all, the regulated stablecoin to CBDC pipeline is real. Is in, say, USDC becomes what everyone uses in the US, and PYUSD and all those. And if CBDCs as our like legit CBDCs never happen, it's easy enough to just start ratcheting up regulations slowly on these things until it's the same thing. And then the different treatment for different crypto types, like I very much feel two ways about the made in America crypto idea. Because on the one hand, it seems like a fantastic way of just like, well, we're not going to get everything, but at least massive amounts are exempted from capital gains, and more importantly, capital gains reporting. That seems like an absolute win. I love that. That being said, what if then, in order to comply to be categorized as made in America, you have to have enough of the infrastructure and development and leadership vulnerable to capture by the U.S. government? Then that's all okay. Now everything cool, the government can censor. That sucks. And obviously you start to get into like the national security argument where, well, we have to control so much of the Bitcoin hash rate for national security purposes to make sure you get to that. And then of course you get to like the privacy thing is going to rear its ugly head before you know it. And so, yeah, that's kind of my Cliff's Notes type thing on this.
Yeah, I've been look. I will be very, very interested to see what made in America means, because I think it was Eric Trump that put that out. And
Mm-hmm.
so what he said was crypto projects, because, okay, so is Bitcoin made in America? Is it, if it's mined in America, does that mean that it's American Bitcoin? But if it's Bitcoin that was mined somewhere else, that's not American Bitcoin. How do you determine that? What kind of projects? And by the way, this is, so I'm working on this gold-backed privacy stablecoin, and I would have never thought of doing it in the United States. And now I actually have to consider that at some point,
Mm-hmm.
which that's actually a bit of a
It's wild.
mind. That's wild, and I don't even saying that is weird. But at the same time, yeah, I don't know what that means. And you're right, on the national security front. I mean, I look at this, it's like, okay, I remember when Trump, well, the first thing Trump said is like, we need to mine all of the Bitcoin here. But the way that he said it, it's like, does he even know that it's not physical? Like, it was a very odd the way that he initially said it. But I'm like, there aren't that many Bitcoin left to mine. But
Mm-hmm.
then I think Chinese companies control 70% of the manufacture of the ASICs. So how's this all going to play out if
Well,
this
yeah.
becomes the national security arc of this? Right now, we've got Nvidia, but they get all of their hardware from Taiwan, and then
Mm-hmm.
like trade wars are really bad. I would argue we got COVID because of the last round of trade wars. I actually think that was in part a reaction
Yeah,
to
very
that.
much so.
So
The Made in America thing, um, it's interesting because I'd like to CoinMarketCap and CoinGecko, which are like the authoritative sources for crypto, unfortunately. In fact, they're so authoritative, according to the way people work, that in order to have an expedited update on your token, you can pay like $1,000 for like to get it done like the same day. Like they literally make a business out of updating their stuff very quickly, and it is
yep.
pretty crazy. But there are made in America categories right now, and um, a lot of them. Like let me just pop in like look really quick on Digibyte, right? Because that's one of them old school ones that serves as a
Yep.
good thing. Digibyte is considered made in the USA. Now, Digibyte is a fully mined cryptocurrency, right? It's a proof of work. It's one of the actual more interesting proof of work pioneers. They've done a lot of interesting work on decentralizing pools and stuff like that. But so the founder, Jared Tate, is an American who is he's very like patriotic. I would say like right wing, liberty leaning right wing, but like very very Republican esque, right? And the mining, I mean, for most of Digibyte's history, I'm sure the mining has been mostly concentrated in China. But as far as now, is it like what qualifies that? And also, do you think do we think, I should say, is the open question, that whoever comes up with this bill, I mean, hope or executive order, hope it's not one of those, but like legislation that says that exempts these companies from capital gains, what are they going to say? Like, according to, are they going to just say, can reasonably be say it, and then they go by? Is it going to line up with like the CoinMarketCap list, or is it going to be must have 70% of validators slash miners operating within the U.S. geographical barriers? That's where it gets dicey. But like if it's a company that, like, let's just say a company says, I'm going to launch decentralized coin X. Like, let's just say Zcash, right? There's a company, the U.S. based company, Electric Coin Company, that does the code and launch the project. Then anyone can own it. Validators and like miners are all over the world. That doesn't matter as long as the core company who's developing on it is U.S. based. That
Yep.
I hope that that's what it is, because that's easy enough to like make happen while not making it centralized in the U.S. I think that the idea is the enrichment type thing. Is if you build here, you make money here, you get breaks here, and not so much of a control thing. So I hope that however this gets shipped up, it turns that way.
I'm pretty pessimistic that whatever the bill is going to make any sense whatsoever. Like
Of
again,
course.
the whole concept is bizarre. But at least Trump is not a Bitcoin maxi. I will say
Mm-hmm.
this much. I mean, again, I'm still in shock that he followed through on Ross and like did a full pardon. I'm still in shock about. So I mean, I've got to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, regardless of how beaten down for 2 decades I've ever been on this. But at least he's also not a maxi. So whatever we're going to get will probably be bad coming out of Congress, but at least it won't be it won't be strictly Bitcoin maximalism. But you're right. I mean, how you would define that and whether or not it'll even pass is another thing as well. Because as you said, there are a lot of different ways you could define made in America. And and by the way, it's the whatever layer of tracking to determine whether something is made in America or not. That's also potentially problematic, right? I mean, that's often the case with these things is it's trying to comply with whatever arbitrary thing they come up with. That's going to be a challenge. And it might not happen at all. By the way, have you heard about anything more about this made in America outside of Eric Trump tweeting? Because I actually haven't seen anything. I've seen nothing specific. It's just been as vague as projects, like not even no other guidelines.
It's not like cryptocurrencies. You wouldn't pay capital gains on those currencies. And that's as far as it's gotten. So I do know that I had a recent experience with CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap where I just went and I said, oh, just because, speculative markets come and go and people might think, oh, this is going to be very profitable to have like, why wouldn't you buy a coin you don't have to pay tax on kind of thing. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to see if I can get the label for Dash for these because Dash's founders from Arizona. There's a development company that does some of the development or majority of the protocol development. There's a legal wrapper in the U.S., even though it's completely global with everything else. I was like, is that enough to qualify? And apparently it was. Just saying it was founded by an American, and there is a dev team that is headquartered in the U.S. It's not the only dev team at all, but like there is a dev team, and then they're like, they bought it. Now, is that enough? I hope that that's enough. But yeah. All right, we got to wrap up pretty soon. Let's do the last chill. Other than I already put the Free Roger thing on the screen. I'll put that up as well again. But anything else you think of you want to talk about, let me know.
I mean, freerogernow.org, obviously that's a big one. I guess I've revamped the daylightfreedom.org website. And I'm going to be continuing to update that because it gives, again, completely changing what my focus is. I mean, I will say on there I have exit fiat tab, or I have a running list of the different things that I'm using as I'm living on crypto. So that might be something interesting for people to look at. And that's just about it. But I guess I'll see you in Amsterdam.
Yeah, for sure. So, that'll be in March. There's
May. Well, I think May. I don't know if I'm going to that one, but I think
okay. Well, I'm going to both. So I'll be there in I guess a few weeks here now, like a little over a month. I'll be there for Web3 Amsterdam, and then I'll definitely be there May 9 through 11.
Yep.
Kind of funny coincidence there. And the ETHDAM, that's if you go to any crypto conference specifically, I would say that's my favorite one that I've been to by a decent margin. I know the founders. The Ethereum label is super misleading right now. It started as sort of that, but now it's very freedom and privacy focused. And I know, and obviously, there's a bunch of conferences, but it's like a very well run, slick conference, well produced, very wide range of people in the industry, and et cetera. And I'm very good friends with the organizers, and they're like hardcore libertarians who, love the Free State Project and all this kind of stuff and are really principled and all this. And they may or may not be including taxation theft in in one of their taglines for this coming event. So just saying, good people.
Wow, okay. Good awesome. People. Awesome. Well, that's great. I'm excited. I've never been to Amsterdam, so I'm looking forward to this event.
Yeah, it's a great spot. I am also very happy about Amsterdam's good spot to be. Easy to get to for a lot of people, and yeah. All right, cool stuff. Well, Aaron R. Day on X, is that the handle?
Yep, that's it.
All right. All right. Well, follow Aaron. Go sign the petition on freerossnow.org, and yeah, just keep aware of all this stuff because stuff is changing quick. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye.